Hi everybody, good morning or afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. It's great to see so many people here. So before we begin, let's make a blessing for Torah study. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. You make us holy through this practice of getting steeped in words of Torah, and may these words be pleasing and delicious and sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of our descendants and the mouths of the descendants of all the people of Israel. Baruch Ata Adonai hamelamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. We feel connected to you, great teacher. So this week's Torah portion is the Parsha of Bo. It's the third portion in the book of Exodus, and this is a very exciting point in the whole narrative of the Torah. This is the week before the children of Israel are released from their several hundred years of slavery. And so let's just start by doing a little bit of a review of what happens in this parsha. You can just drop it in the chat. I'll just say for myself, it's a special parsha because if I had had a bat mitzvah which linked up to the week that I was born, this would have been my bat mitzvah parsha. It was my birthday last week. But besides that, what else exciting happens in this Torah portion? The last three plagues, exactly. So we have the last three plagues, namely locusts, thank you, locusts, darkness, and then before the death of the firstborn, you might remember there's a sort of cutaway where God says this basically has the instruction to create a calendar, and on the a couple days before the full moon of that calendar to take this lamb into their households and prepare it, and then to kill the lamb and put the blood on the doorposts and to roast it. And we're also commanded that this is going to be an ongoing practice throughout time. And then we get the last plague, right? And even the Egyptian slave woman's firstborn is taken. Yeah, and yes, there's much weeping and wailing in the land of Egypt. So pretty dramatic and exciting parsha, but where I want to focus is on that instruction about the beginning of the calendar. And so here is the link to just these couple verses from the first two verses of Exodus chapter 12. I will put the link to that whole chapter into the chat, and also I will post those verses into the chat. And firstly, I want to see how many different, actually, let me see if I can get it from here. Well, let's see if this works. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim le'emor. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodeshim, rishon hu lachem lachodshei Hashanah. This month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So what strikes you here? Can we unpack this a little bit? What is going on here? And do we notice any phrases, anyone who's capable of the Hebrew, do we notice any phrases that might be meaningful or applicable to us? Okay, so we have the phrase Rosh Chodeshim, which we might know Rosh Chodesh is what we call the new moon, or the celebration of the beginning of a new Hebrew month. So it sets up a new beginning for the Jewish people. Very good. This month should be for you the beginning of months, and in a way this is the birth of us as a people. And indeed, Rashi says this is the first actual commandment in the whole Torah. And interestingly, this actually is given even in Egypt. This is before they leave Egypt, which is perhaps interesting. The Hasidic rabbis have an image of the Israelite people in Egypt being like a fetus in its mother's womb, like fully formed, but still contained within another people or another being. Anything else that we notice? Beautiful. Taking control over marking time as a step towards self-liberation and self-definition as a people. You know where I'm going with this. Very nice. Okay, and what about the word chodesh? Does anyone know anything about the word chodesh? It's the Hebrew word for month, but it's the same three letters as a different Hebrew word that you might know. It means new. Exactly. The Hebrew word for month literally means newness. Why does it mean it's related to new? Why does it mean new? Kind of obvious, but said anyway. I'm going to, at this point, give you the full source sheet that we're going to look at. It's a fresh start. It's a beginning. Yeah, but specifically, it's new moon. It's a new moon. And as the commentators will point out, in the solar cycle, there isn't an obvious point of newness. In the lunar cycle, there is this very obvious, visible, cyclical nature, where the moon appears to disappear and then reappear. Okay, so here is the source sheet. Here is the source sheet I've posted into the chat that hopefully if you open that up should, and indeed, let's see if I can share my screen. Oh, I think you have to make me a co-host, Mara, to let me share my screen. Or you could share the screen with the source sheet, either way.
You should be able to share now.
Okay, great. All right. Here we go. You all see that? Great. Okay. So, right. The sun does not have chodeshim or months or newnesses in the same way. So, and Ibn Ezra, another medieval commentator, makes the same point. The moon doesn't have a year, just like the sun doesn't have a month, because the sun does not have any renewal. The only thing that is renewed is the light of the moon, and that's why a month is called a chodesh, or a newness, right? I hadn't really ever thought about that before, that the solar year doesn't have these obvious periods of renewal. Okay. Mara, can you let people unmute themselves so that we can have someone else read this next source for us? Source number 4. Who would like to be our reader? You have to count a mark. Always keen to read. I think you can unmute yourself and then read the Rashi for us, please.
This month, let me just lower this. Okay. God showed him Moses the moon in her newness, i.e., the first stage of its renewal, and said to him, "The time when the moon renews herself, thus shall be unto you the beginning of the month." This is a quote from an ancient midrash, Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael.
Okay, pause there for a second. So actually Rashi's commenting on HaChodesh Hazeh, like this Chodesh, because the new phase of the moon is called the Chodesh. So the midrash is kind of making sort of a wordplay. It's saying God actually pointed to a new moon and said, that's what it looks like. That's what you're looking for when you're going to celebrate new moons in the future. It should look like this, a tiny little sliver, HaChodesh Hazeh. Okay, and then so that's what the midrash says, and then Rashi's writing maybe 1,000 years later, and then he gives an additional comment. Cantamark, please continue.
But no scriptural verse can lose its literal meaning, which is that God was speaking of this in reference to the month of Nisan. That is, that this month shall be the beginning in the order of counting the months, so that Iyar shall be called the second, Sivan the third, and so on.
Great, thank you so much. Although, does anyone know anything about the names of the Jewish names of the months that might slightly contradict what Rashi is trying to tell us? Well, I'll tell you, because I can't see the chat and the screen share at the same time. These names of the months are not used in the Torah. These are actually Babylonian names. They're not even Hebrew words. And we do know that this is supposed to be the month of the spring equinox because it's called Chodesh HaAviv, the month of the spring in the Torah. But the name Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, and so forth are not actually used in the Torah. However, Rashi is making the point that not only is God saying, this is what a new moon looks like, but this particular new moon should be the beginning of your calendar count. Now, a little bit of an obvious question. What's funny about that when we think of the Jewish calendar? And you can put it in the chat, or I believe you can unmute yourself. Right. We have our new year in the fall. It's a different month. It's actually the 7th month. And we think of Rosh Hashanah as the time of the new year. So the Mishnah famously says there are 4 new years. Rosh Hashanah is one, and there's another one in the spring. And then actually Tu B'Shvat, which is coming up next Sunday night, and Monday is another new year. So just like we have a tax year and a school year and a calendar year, and they're all going at once, and we're not really confused by it. We know we're in 2023, but also that the school year started in the fall, and so on and so forth. Actually, I think the American tax year is the same year. The British tax year is an April through March year. But if you work in a nonprofit, you might have a July through June year, for instance. So we know that different calendrical cycles can go at the same time. And there's also a new year, Irene, in the 1 month before Rosh Hashanah is called the New Year of the domesticated beasts, of the cattle. And both that and the New Year of the trees are really like tax years, basically. It's like, when do you count your tithing from? Is it before or after this cutoff date? So somebody else, Ginny says, up a little bit, was the Jewish calendar strictly a lunar calendar in the beginning, or did it always include a solar aspect? Another very good question, because our Jewish year is in fact not fully lunar. When we think about it, a fully lunar calendar is like the Muslim calendar, which anyone who follows the Muslim calendar knows that the month of Ramadan is a month earlier every year, because it's a strictly lunar calendar, and the lunar calendar is 11 days shorter than the solar year. So it slips back in time, half a month relative to the solar calendar every year. And we're going to come to your question. I don't want to give away the answer, but it's a great question. And in fact, this is, Ginny says, we talk about Rosh Chodesh as being a lunar month, but we needed a solar aspect to keep the holidays at the correct time of year. Exactly so, and we're going to come to it and discuss it a little bit more. Let's go back to our source sheet. Okay, so actually, I'll bring us down to where Ibn Ezra says here. Do you see this source number? Screen share, you're not my friend. Source number 6. Ibn Ezra quotes Rabbi Yehuda HaParsi, Rabbi Judah the Persian, who says that the Israelites, the Jewish people, used to count according to solar years, like the laws of the uncircumcised nations of the world. I think it's interesting that he says uncircumcised because he's living in a Muslim country. So presumably he is noting this in contradistinction to the Muslim calendar, which is lunar. But it's an interesting claim that the Jewish people actually used to have a solar calendar. But now, to come to this point that people were very sensibly making, that control of time is a way of self-definition. Without control of time, we don't have control of very much. Will someone read for us what the Sforno, who's a Renaissance commentator, source number 5, he's an Italian Renaissance commentator. Will you read source number 5 for us, somebody? Put your little yellow hand up. because otherwise I can't see you. Or just unmute yourself and go for it.
This month shall be for you the beginning of months. From now on, these months will be yours to do as you like. This is the way of contrast to the years when you were enslaved, when you had no control over your time or timetable at all. While you were enslaved, your days, hours, minutes, even were always at the beck and call of your taskmasters.
Great. Okay, so on a very literal level, having control of time is a primary mark of freedom. The less control over our own time we have, the less free we tend to feel, right? Anyone who's been a parent of young children or had a very, very all-consuming job, or even both at once, oh my God, knows something about this, right? But on a more abstract level, we also, as we were talking about, have not just the sense of how much control we have over how we spend our time, but also how we define time. And so I wanted to bring this I found on Instagram, and if you look at it, you'll see these are New Year's days according to many different calendars. This is just New Year's days happening this year. And yes, it's ironic that they're being framed in terms of what their date is in the Gregorian year, but that, I guess, reinforces the point that whatever calendar you're counting in is the calendar of the dominant culture. I'll point out a couple of other interesting things here. You can see all these dates around March 21st, 22nd. There's a big cluster here. That is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That's what's being talked about, right, in our passage. And then around April 13th, 14th, that's Pesach. So these dates that we observe as very key dates. And I'll point out, those who don't know, that every year there are several, in addition to the regular, every Shabbat is special and we read Torah every Shabbat, but there are certain points in the year where we celebrate a special Shabbat and we take out an additional Torah scroll and read an additional portion of Torah. And when we get to the day in the Shabbat immediately before the new moon of the month of Nisan, we read this passage. We take out an additional scroll and read this passage. So it's not just read this week. It will be read again in about 10 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 8 weeks time. So anyway, it will be read again when we come around to it, because we still observe that this new moon is the beginning of our calendrical cycle. Now, the other thing I thought was quite sweet and lovely was in the comments of this. This is from an account called Decolonial Atlas, and then I put in here some of the comments that people had posted underneath this post, where they say, according to my calendar, it's actually a bit different, or you're too much taking the word of some dominant culture and not really remembering the other people who've been colonized by this culture. Counted a bit differently. Well, we don't accord to this calendar. Or thank you for remembering that we exist, says this Assyrian person. And then this Jewish person says, Jewish New Year falls on the same day, every year, the 1st of Tishrei. And someone adds a calendar that wasn't mentioned here. And anyway, I just thought this was like a lovely back and forth, to see so many people posting on Instagram, like, yeah, we appreciate this, and we know more about our calendars. And it's just like living evidence that so many different peoples in the world are still living by so many different calendars. So this is to look at this piece that comes from the book of Exodus, from this week's Torah portion. However, I want to bring in an additional piece now, and this we're going to start by looking at where the moon and the heavenly bodies are discussed in the account of creation in Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, and then we're going to look at a really wonderful story from the Talmud. Some people may have studied before, but some perhaps not, which I think is pretty fascinating. So I want folks to put your text close analysis caps on. We're going to look at the account of the creation of the luminaries in Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 to 19. And if you're able to look in the Hebrew, all the better. And if you're reading in English, that's great too. And can we have a different reader? Would somebody other than Kent Mark like to read a little chunk for us? Great, Julie, thanks.
I can do it. Divinity declared, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to distinguish day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, for the days and for the years. And they serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. Divinity made the two great lights, the great light to have rulership of the day and the little light to have rulership of the night and the stars. And divinity set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, and to have rulership of the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And divinity saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie. So, there are actually, well, I wonder if anyone spots anything at all surprising or perhaps contradictory in this passage. Oh, I lost you. Why is the moon masculine? So is the word moon given here? There was light. Okay, so one good question is, where was the light that was created at the beginning on the first day coming from if the sun and the moon and the stars were only being introduced now? Great question.
Or.
Right, we just have or, light as a general concept, but we don't know where it's coming from. So actually both the word for sun, chama, or shemesh, and the word for moon, levana, or yerech, two different words for both, are both feminine, actually. But neither of those names is used here, which I think is quite interesting. The word sun and the word moon is not actually used in this passage. Instead, what are they called? They're called ma'or, so they're just called lights. And we have this interesting contradiction that it says God created the two great lights. And then, yes, probably Gordon, that's what I assume, that they don't want to give the names of the sun or the moon lest they be considered deities. That's my assumption. I don't know that that's why, but yes, I'm guessing that's why. But you also have this kind of interesting contradiction, because first it says that God is going to create the two great lights, but then it seems to say that there's a greater light and a lesser light, right? Divinity made the two great lights, the great light to have the rulership of the day and the little light to have rulership of the night. I also want to point out in this first two verses, there are a lot of different things that these lights are apparently there to do, right? It says, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky. Number one, to distinguish day from night. So you have a different form of light in the day and a different form of light in the night. And that's how you can tell it's the day or the night, right? We may think this is entirely obvious, but think it's not entirely obvious. We could live in a different reality. This is how our reality is set up, and this is the origin myth of the reality that we do live in. There's a different quality of the light, whether it's day or it's night. Okay. And then it says they shall serve as signs for the set times. So there's something about like, this is how people will define their calendars for the days and for the years, meaning both like, this is how we'll tell where in the year we are, and also how we'll tell what year we're in. So when you think about astronomy or astrology, if you know how to read the stars, you know a lot about when you are. actually, from what stars you can see, both in terms of what season it is, and if you're really, keeping a long count, where in time you are on a grand scale. So all of that is put into these couple verses, which takes a bit of a close reading to see. Now, there's this midrash or agada that I want to bring for us. Mara, we've got a little bit of background noise, so could you just make sure that everyone's muted except me? Thanks. So this midrash is from Chulin, from Tractate Chulin of the Talmud, and Tractate Chulin has some of the most mythical and strange and wonderful material that we find in the Talmud. Maybe it's Mara's own account which is making the noise. Who knows? So here is the story that the rabbis give. It's in the source sheet. The link to the source sheet. Yes, I can repost that, or maybe Mara, you can repost that, please. And we'll post it with the video on the YouTube. Thank you so much. Yeah, this video will be posted within the next 24 or 48 hours, and we'll put the link to the source sheet there with it too. So this is a story which the rabbis of the Talmud, a couple of rabbis of the Talmud, use to explain how it comes to be that we have this two great lights, and then it turns out that one great light is rather greater than the other great light, namely the sun is a lot bigger, and also it has its own light. The moon is in fact only reflecting the light of the sun, right? Which the ancients understood. They knew that. They knew that the moon was reflecting the sun's light. So I would like to have 3 volunteers, please. I would like a narrator, I would like a voice of God, and I would like a voice of the moon. Who would like to be, and can you unmute yourself so that Mara removed that power from you? Susan, would you like to be the narrator? Mara, can you make sure that people can unmute themselves? Would you like to be the narrator, the voice of God, or the voice of the moon?
Please assign me.
You can be the voice of God.
Okay.
We need 2 more volunteers, please. Don't be shy. Kamamba, would you like to be the narrator? And Serena, you can be the voice of the moon.
Assign me, please.
I would like for you to be the narrator.
All right.
And then Serena, please would you be the voice of the moon?
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, take it away, you guys.
Where do I see learning?
Oh, we're reading source number 8, which begins, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi raises a contradiction.
Okay.
Do you see that?
I see that, and then I will be where?
We're going to read all the way down to the end of this source.
Okay. Okay. Please just give me.
I'll scroll. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Take it away. Okay, Kamamba, you're the narrator.
Oh.
So you start.
Oh, I'm the first one, right?
Yeah, you start from the beginning.
Rabbi Shimon ben Pizza raises a contradiction between 2 verses. It is written, and God made the 2 great lights. And it is also written in the same verse, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, indicating that only one was great.
Keep going.
When God first created the sun and the moon, they were equally bright. Then the moon said before the Holy One, "Blessed be he, master of the universe."
Hang on, this is where we need the voice of the moon.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we lost.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's you.
Excuse me, I can't see it. Someone's in the chat. Thank you. Okay, okay. Then the moon said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe, is it possible for two kings to serve with one crown? One of us must be subservient to the other.
Okay, then back to the narrator. Sorry, this is more complicated than I thought it would be. Commander, you're the narrator.
Mhm. God therefore said to her, the moon, if
Susan?
so,
No, hang on. This is where God, the voice of God, which is Susan, comes in.
Oh, if so, go and diminish yourself.
Next.
okay.
Okay, she said before him, master of the universe, since I made a correct observation before you, must I diminish myself?
And God said to her, as compensation, go and rule both during the day, along with the sun, and during the night.
She said to him, what is the greatness of shining alongside the sun? What use is a candle in the middle of the day?
God said to her, go, let the Jewish people count the days and years with you, and this will be your greatness.
She said to him, but the Jewish people will count with the sun as well, as it is impossible that they will not count seasons with it, as it is written, and let them be the signs and the season, and for seasons, and for days and years.
God said to her, go, let righteous men be named after you. Just as you are called the lesser, Hakatan, light, there will be Yaakov Hakatan, i.e. Jacob, our forefathers.
Who's called Hakatan in.
Shmuel Hakatan, the Tanah, and David Hakatan, King David.
Okay, so then Kabamba, read this last bit for us.
God saw that the moon was not comforted. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, bring atonement for me, since I diminished the moon. The Gemara
Yeah, this book, the Talmud.
notes, and this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says. What is different about the great offering of the new moon? That it is stated with regard to it for the Lord, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, the goat shall be an atonement for me for having diminished the size of the moon.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to our readers. So I'll put the next source in as well, which is that passage from Numbers, where it says explicitly that it says it in a separate category, that apparently there's a goat offering, a sin offering for the new moon, and it says Ladonai. Now, Ladonai can mean to the Lord, but it can also mean for the Lord. So the rabbis are making this sort of pun or play, saying God actually feels the need to make atonement, God's self, for having reduced the size of the moon. So it's a pretty fascinating, I mean, obviously this is an imaginary dialogue, right? The rabbis are imagining this conversation between the moon, that the moon comes to God and says, but you said 2 great lights. Can we really have 2 great lights? And God's like, yeah, good point. You should make yourself smaller. And then the moon's like, but that's not fair. What I said is true. Why should I be the one that has to diminish myself? And God is like, yeah, you're right. It's not fair. How about we'll see you in the daytime and in the nighttime? And the moon's like, well, okay, fine, big deal. you won't be able to see me very much of me in the daytime because the sun will be shining. What's the point of, you can't see a candle flame in the broad daylight. And God's like, okay, well, how about we make the Jewish calendar dependent on the moon? And the moon and the moon's like, well, okay, but the Jewish calendar is also dependent on the sun, like we were just discussing. And then God says, well, there's something good about being little too. In fact, some of the greatest characters in Jewish history are also described as being little or lesser, which I think is pretty fascinating, right? Why do we identify with being small? Or like there's something good about being the younger son, or there's something good about being the lesser. And then, but where it ultimately lands is that God also feels that this is not the correct, that there's something to make atonement for in this. Pretty fascinating, right? So before we move on, I just want to see if anyone wants to comment on any of this. It does sound like the moon is a bit whiny. Okay, so the moon is often identified as being a feminine force, presumably partly because women's menstrual cycles are roughly the same length of time as a lunar cycle, and some say that if you're not exposed to too much light pollution, then your cycle will sync up with the moon. And the moon is one of the aspects of the Shekhinah, the feminine face of God, or the immanent presence of God. So yes, this is very much read as a drush about a mythos about the constriction or limitations that have been put on females and on the feminine in the last few millennia, and the changes that are happening in our time. And Ellen, absolutely, we the Jewish people are compared to the moon, as there are times, and not just we the Jewish people, we people, but also specifically the Jewish people are compared to the moon in that we have our cycles, we wax and we wane, we have our times of fullness and we have our times of lack. Beautiful. Commander, if you just make a note of where the of the link, you'll be able to get back to it. It's on the internet. It's on Sefaria, and Mara will make sure to post the link to this source sheet next to the video when that's put up on YouTube. So hopefully you'll be able to find it again. Any other thoughts about this rather interesting story? Sorry, this is a lightning tour of some ideas. Right, so Janet says, why call her whiny? She's only standing up for herself. You said I'm going to be a great light. I'm going to be a small light. You just told me I was going to be a great light. Yeah, she's just sticking up for herself. And her first point is a very good one. It's like, I said what's true. Why am I being penalized for saying what's true? Yeah, I don't think the rabbis are blind to the gender politics of this story. I definitely don't think that the rabbis are blind to the gender politics here. And they also feel bad about it. This is why it lands on God saying, I need to make atonement for this. And yes, a deity that admits their mistakes. Yeah, we have a God who is changing and becoming, just as we are changing and becoming. Yeah, sometimes the sun is more brilliant, and sometimes the moon is more brilliant than the sun. Because it illuminates the night. Beautiful point. In the darkness, the light is all the more relevant. And nature needs the times of darkness. And the role of the moon is harder to grasp than the obvious qualities of the sun. And the role of the moon is very useful. As Ibn Ezra points out, or in the Malbim, the sun doesn't have easily trackable cycles. The moon helps us track time in a much more active way. And there are some say that the moon has helped humans track their fertility and make choices about conception for, a lot longer than recorded history. Atonement because God feels bad about it. God, it's a play on words about this goat offering for atonement at the new moon. But that's how they're choosing to read it, that God feels the need to apologize for this. It's a very, the powers of negotiation, small is beautiful. And indeed, although the moon is small, it steers the tides. It is very powerful. Farmers use the moon to determine when to plant and so forth. And just like the moon, the Jewish people are a small but mighty and constant light, although some say that it's not constant. The whole point is that it's cyclical. So I just want to take us to our last couple sources. There are a few other things that I put on here because I thought they were interesting, but we're not going to have time. I knew we wouldn't have time to look at, but by all means, if you want to, you are looking at my screen share, right? So let's just have a look at these last couple sources. Sources number 19 from the Netzach Israel and through to the end. So the Netzach Israel says Yaakov is called small, and his calendar is based on the small luminary. The moon, literally the white one, Levana is the white one. Edom, who is Esav, who's also associated with Rome and with the Roman Church. Edom is called, which means red, is called red. His food is red, his land is red, his warriors are red, his clothing is red, because Esav, or Edom, receives his strength from the sun, which is red. Now, I know that in traditional Chinese medicine, the feminine is associated as white and the masculine is associated as red. I think these are quite common cultural sort of labelings or understandings. But it's very interesting that there's a sort of pride in identifying with the lesser light, the weaker light, the more febrile and changeable. And I think maybe there's it's easier in some ways. It's hard to be a victim in some ways. It's also you're protected from being a perpetrator to some extent. So I wonder if we would perhaps rather be small and sometimes victims than big red aggressors. And for those who are interested in these ideas, I would recommend the book by Daniel Boyarin called Unheroic Context, The Rise of Heterosexuality and the Invention of the Jewish Man, which is all about Jewish masculinity having different ideals, which are not these big, red, hairy, aggressive ideals of mainstream culture. And then one final connection, which I really think it's quite interesting to point out, is the idea that anti-Semitism, and thanks to everyone who was pointing out that today marks the commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz in 1945, and is one of the dates in the calendar that we commemorate the Holocaust. This is International Holocaust Remembrance Day in the secular calendar, whereas we have a different Holocaust Remembrance Day between Pesach and Shavuot. But this is, when I think about the moon and its identification with the Jewish people, one thing that makes me think about is the cyclical nature of anti-Semitism, which is one of the interesting and unique features about anti-Semitism as a prejudice, is that it is peculiarly cyclical. As Cherie Brown, who's a community organizer and an international educator and trainer in the fields of diversity, equity, and inclusion, who's particularly thoughtful about the intersection of anti-Semitism and other race and identity-based oppressions, writes, this is the very last source on the sheet, anti-Semitism is cyclical. It vacillates between periods of overt persecution, violence, and even genocide, and periods of more subtle, covert forms of anti-Semitism. This insecurity about when anti-Semitism might arise has left many Jews super vigilant, always worrying and on edge. Even in periods of relative security, the worries are always present. And we may remember, the Jews in the 20s in Germany had it pretty good. The Jews in Spain just before the expulsion had it pretty good. Often periods of wealth and security directly precede periods of drastic collapse and terror. So even in periods of relative security, the worries are always present. Has the cycle turned? Is another Inquisition, pogrom, or Holocaust imminent? Are we in possible danger? And these concerns get passed down from generation to generation and seep into every aspect of life. So apologies if this is a slightly bit of a downer note to land on, but when I think about the connection between the Jews and the moon, this strikes me as relevant also. So I just like to give a few minutes before we close for folks to post into the chat. It would be interesting to see if the history of anti-Semitism occurred at particular times of the lunar month. It's a good question. I do know that in the Babylonian calendar, the 9th and 10th of the month, the lunar month, is seen as being unlucky. And many of our fast days, we have 3 months of the year, Yom Kippur being one of them, but also the 9th of Av and the 10th of Tevet, have a fast day at the 10th of the lunar month, which fasting is like a propitiatory practice. It's a way to, in the Jewish tradition, it's a way to try and focus our attention and pull things into a better direction. So I don't know if it does track to when their actual persecution was, although obviously we commemorate big dates in the destruction of Jerusalem around the 10th, 9th, 10th of the month. Right. And Ginny is saying in many women, the most fertile time of the month is around the 14th day, around the time of the full moon, which when you're living in a society that doesn't have a lot of natural light is also a great time for like going out and finding somewhere away from other people and being able to see where you're going in the darkness. And there's also, many people find that they have more energy and that they don't even want to sleep so much around full moon. And you'll notice that again, like at least 5 of our full moons of the year, we have holidays. These good times for celebrations. Oh, there's a squirrel doing an amusing thing outside my window.
Rabbi, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. Do you think you could leave us with a closing thought before we, or an intention for us all for Shabbat?
Thank you so much, Mara. Well, I just want to give us all a blessing as we go into this Shabbat, that wherever we find ourselves in the cycle, whether at the low points or the high points, we remember that it's all part of the process, it's all part of the cycle. And in the words of the song, she changes everything she touches, and everything she touches changes. So wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me. And enjoy the Torah reading. I hope this has given you more insight into the moon.
Thank you, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.